The billionaire's dog sniffed a gun and pointed to his own bodyguard. What would you do if the only creature you truly trusted suddenly turned against the person you relied on the most? Stay until the end, because tonight, instinct will save a life and expose a betrayal no one saw coming. The night hung heavy over Ashcroft Hall, a sprawling estate just outside Seattle. Rain tapped against the tall windows, and thunder rolled somewhere over the sound. The mansion's security lights flickered across the marble floor, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts. In that restless silence, a sharp growl broke the air. Atlas, a Belgian Malinois with eyes like polished amber, stood rigid in the hallway. His fur bristled. Every muscle trembled with focus. His ears pointed toward the east wing, toward the private study where billionaire Quentin Ashcroft worked late, as always. Florencia Paredes, the new dog behaviorist, was halfway down the corridor when she heard the growl. She froze, her sneakers slipping slightly on the slick tile. Atlas never growled without reason. She followed the sound, whispering softly, "Atlas, what is it, boy?" When she reached the study doorway, she saw Dylan, Quentin's chief bodyguard, standing near the fireplace, his hands tucked casually into his jacket pockets. His expression was calm, too calm. Atlas stood between them, hackles raised, teeth bared. "Easy, Atlas," Florencia said, stepping closer. "He is one of us." But the dog did not back down. He moved closer to Dylan, nose twitching, low growls rumbling deep in his chest. The lamp beside the desk flickered once, throwing a faint light across Dylan's sleeve. Florencia caught it, a thin, grayish smear, like soot. The scent hit her next. Acrid, metallic, burnt. Gunpowder. The word pulsed in her mind. She swallowed, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had been to the shooting range earlier. But Atlas's reaction was not nothing. It was warning. Dylan noticed her staring. He smiled faintly, that tight, polite kind of smile that hides something sharper underneath. "The dog is jumpy tonight," he said. "Too much thunder." Florencia forced a nod, but her gut twisted. She glanced down at Atlas, who stood absolutely still, his gaze locked on the man's hand. Her fingers itched to pull her phone, to record, but something told her not to move. Behind them, the elevator chimed softly. Quentin's voice echoed down the hall, smooth, calm, unmistakably tired. "Florencia, is everything all right?" She turned, her voice catching. "Yes, sir. Atlas, just—" But before she could finish, Dylan stepped forward, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "False alarm," he said quickly. "I will take care of it." "You koi." Atlas snapped, the sudden snarl slicing through the air like a siren. Florencia jerked back. The dog lunged forward, teeth flashing, stopping inches from Dylan's arm before she shouted his name. He obeyed instantly but did not look away from the man. For a long second no one moved. Then Dylan laughed, a dry, uncomfortable sound. "You really should train him better," he muttered, brushing past. Florencia stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air even after he was gone. Atlas turned his head toward her, eyes steady, unblinking. For a heartbeat, she felt as if the dog was trying to tell her something, something urgent, something she was not ready to believe. Outside, thunder cracked again, rattling the glass. She crouched beside Atlas and whispered, "You know something I do not, do you?" He exhaled, a quiet huff of breath that fogged the cold marble floor. That was the moment Florencia realized. Sometimes loyalty warns before love does, and tonight, instinct might be the only thing keeping her alive. Now, let us go back to our main character, the man who had everything to lose, and no idea that danger was standing just a few feet behind him. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. Morning light filtered through the tall glass walls of Ashcroft Hall, soft and cold. Rain from the night before still clung to the window panes. In the quiet of the kitchen, Florencia Paredes poured herself a cup of black coffee and tried to steady her thoughts. Atlas lay by her feet, resting his head on his paws, but his ears twitched at every sound. Florencia could not stop replaying last night in her mind, the smell of gunpowder, Dylan's smile, and that unshakable growl. She had worked with hundreds of dogs before, and she trusted their instincts more than her own. Atlas had never reacted like that without a reason. Her phone buzzed. A text from the estate manager reminded her of the morning routine feeding, training, and an inspection by the security team. She glanced at Atlas. "Looks like we are back to work, boy," she said softly. The dog lifted his head, brown eyes calm but alert. Down the hall, Quentin Ashcroft was already awake. The billionaire rarely slept past dawn. He stood by the wide window of his study, staring at the mist rising over the lake. His left hand rested lightly on the bandage at his wrist, a scar from a car accident years ago, the one that had made him value control above all else. Control was safety. Control was peace. When Florencia entered the room, he turned slightly. "Good morning," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Good morning, Mr. Ashcroft," she replied. "Atlas is ready for his morning run." "Way." He nodded, his gaze following the dog. "He trusts you more than he has trusted anyone in a long time." Florencia smiled faintly. "Dogs do not fake it. They either trust you or they do not." Quentin studied her for a moment, the corner of his mouth tightening. "I suppose that is easier for them. Humans are better at pretending." For a second, something in his tone made her pause. The loneliness behind his precision, the fatigue behind his confidence, it all flashed across his face before he hid it again. As she clipped Atlas's leash, Quentin added, "Dylan will join you on the trail. Security protocol." Her pulse jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. Of course. Minutes later, they stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Dylan walked several paces behind them, silent, gloved hands tucked into his jacket. Atlas kept glancing back, his pace uneasy. Florencia tightened her grip on the leash. Halfway around the lake path, she slowed down. "You feel it too, huh?" she murmured. Atlas's tail flicked once, cautious. She decided then to test her suspicion. She bent, pretending to adjust the leash, and pressed a small training clicker hidden in her pocket. Atlas froze, then turned his head toward Dylan again. The low growl returned, quiet but unmistakable. When they returned to the mansion, Quentin was waiting near the front steps. "Everything all right?" he asked. Florencia hesitated. "Atlas is distracted. He keeps reacting to something around Dylan." Dylan's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, the dog is nervous. She keeps changing commands without warning." Quentin's eyes moved between them, unreadable. "Enough for today," he said finally. "Atlas needs rest." Florencia opened her mouth to argue but stopped. The hierarchy in this house was clear. She gave a short nod and led Atlas inside. That evening, as she wrote her notes in the staff quarters, she slipped a small piece of cloth into a sealed plastic bag, the same one she had taken from Dylan's jacket pocket earlier that day when he left it on the bench. The faint trace of burnt residue was still there. She wrote one line beneath it in her notebook. "Dogs never lie. Humans do." Dull. Outside, lightning flickered again over the horizon, reflecting off the dark surface of the lake. Inside the mansion, everything looked calm. But deep down, Florencia felt that the storm had only just begun. The sound of sirens faded into the distance as calm returned to Ashcroft Hall, but the silence that followed was even heavier than the chaos before. The police had taken Dylan away, his injured arm wrapped in a torn bandage, his expression empty. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the study walls. Florencia Paredes sat at the edge of a leather sofa, Atlas resting his head against her knee. Across from her, Quentin Ashcroft stood near the broken window, the faint cut on his shoulder now bandaged. He had barely spoken since the officers left. His usually steady composure seemed fractured. Finally, he turned to her. "You could have been killed." Florencia shook her head slowly. "So could you." Atlas only reacted because he sensed the danger before any of us did. Quentin glanced down at the dog, who lifted his head at the sound of his name. There was gratitude in the billionaire's eyes, but also something else, something heavier. "It was not random," he said quietly. "He did not act on his own. Dylan was following someone's orders." Florencia's breath caught. "Do you know who?" Quentin hesitated, staring at the dark lake outside the shattered window. "I have a suspicion. This is not the first time someone has tried to get close. Last year, my car brakes failed on a mountain road. I thought it was an accident. Now I am not sure." She studied him, realizing that beneath his expensive suits and precise tone was a man who lived with constant fear disguised as logic. "Then we need to find out who is behind this," she said firmly. Quentin turned toward her. "You do not understand. Whoever it is has access to my security, my network, my home. That means they have access to you too. I will not risk that." Florencia looked down at Atlas, who was watching them both. "You cannot face this alone," she said softly, "and you do not have to." For the first time, he did not argue. His shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of his isolation showing through. "Then you stay," he said at last. "For now, until this is finished." The next morning, the mansion felt different. The staff walked in silence, glancing nervously at the repaired window and the lingering stains on the floor. Security cameras were being replaced, and new guards checked every corner. Florencia moved through the house with Atlas beside her. She stopped by the garden, where the sunlight cut through the mist like threads of gold. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Quentin joined her quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You did not sleep," he said. "Neither did you," she replied, accepting the cup. He smiled faintly. Touch. They stood together in silence. It was not comfortable, but it was honest. The distance between them had shifted, no longer employer and employee, but 2 people who had survived something terrifying and unspoken. "I built this house to keep the world out," Quentin said at last. "But now I see that walls do not protect you. They only make you easier to target." Florencia turned to him, her expression soft but resolute. "Maybe walls do not protect, but trust does. Sometimes you have to let the right people in." His eyes met hers for a long moment. There was something human there. No arrogance, no command, only gratitude and quiet respect. Before either could speak, Atlas barked once, sharp and alert. Quentin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered, frowning as he listened. When he hung up, his face had gone pale. "The security chief just confirmed something," he said. "The files Dylan accessed last night were transferred off-site before he was arrested. Someone else was watching." Florencia felt a chill run through her. "You mean?" "Yes," he said grimly. "The person behind him is still out there." Atlas let out a low growl as if he understood every word. Florencia stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then we find them before they try again." Quentin nodded slowly. "You and that dog may be the only ones I can trust." The wind moved through the trees, whispering across the water. Florencia looked at him, her heart pounding, not from fear but from conviction. "Then we start today," she said. In that moment, under the pale light of morning, Billionaire and dog trainer stood side by side, not as employer and employee, but as 2 people bound by survival and an unspoken promise. The battle was far from over, but for the first time they were not alone. Rain returned 2 nights later, tapping softly against the tall windows of Ashcroft Hall like a reminder that peace never lasts long. The mansion was quiet again, but the air carried a new tension. Every hallway light stayed on, and guards rotated in pairs. Still, Florencia Paredes could feel eyes that were not supposed to be there. She worked late in the training room with Atlas, running simple obedience drills to calm him and herself. The rhythmic commands and barks filled the space like heartbeats. Sit, stay, watch. Atlas obeyed each word perfectly, his body taut with focus. The door creaked. Quentin's voice drifted in, low and tired. "You 2 never stop working, do you?" Florencia smiled faintly. "Routine keeps him calm. It keeps me sane." He stepped inside, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his phone still in hand. "I have been reviewing Dylan's encrypted messages. The trail leads to a shell company owned by my half-brother Marcus." His tone was calm, but his jaw tightened as he spoke the name. "He has been trying to seize my shares for years." I thought he finally gave up. Florencia felt anger rise for him. "Family can hurt deeper than strangers," she said quietly. He looked at her then, something soft flickering behind his eyes. "Do you always talk like you have lived every kind of pain?" "Only the ones that matter," she replied, her voice steady. They both laughed a little, and for a brief moment the storm outside seemed to fade. But then Quentin's phone buzzed again. He read the message, and the color drained from his face. "It is from one of my accountants," he said. "Marcus withdrew $2 million this morning and ordered a private flight to Vancouver. He will disappear before the authorities can touch him." Florencia's instincts kicked in. "Unless we stop him first." He looked up sharply. "You want to chase him?" "I want to help you finish what he started," she said. "I owe you that much." "You do not owe me anything," he said softly. She met his eyes. "Then call it loyalty." An hour later, they were in Quentin's SUV, the city lights flickering across the windshield as the rain fell harder. Atlas sat between them, head high, ears alert. The road stretched dark and empty toward the private airfield on the outskirts of Seattle. Quentin's fingers gripped the steering wheel. "Security will meet us there, but Marcus has friends in high places. If he reaches that plane, he is gone." Florencia glanced at him. "Then, we cannot let him reach it." "Lou." As they neared the runway, flashing lights came into view. A small jet stood ready, its engines whining. Figures moved near the steps, Marcus's men, dressed in black. Quentin pulled the car behind a hangar, jaw tight. We cannot risk confrontation. I just need proof that ties him to the attempt. Florencia looked down at Atlas. Can he track Marcus? Yes, Quentin said, his voice low. Marcus used to visit the estate. Atlas remembers his scent. Florencia opened the door. Rain hit her face instantly, cold and sharp. She whispered, "Find him, boy." Atlas darted forward, nose to the ground, moving with precision across the tarmac. Quentin followed close behind, keeping his flashlight low. They rounded the edge of the hangar just as Atlas froze, staring toward a sleek black car idling near the plane. A man inside was talking rapidly on a phone. Even from the distance, Quentin recognized him. Marcus. "Get the camera," Quentin said. "We record everything." Main's eye. Florencia lifted her phone, zooming in. Marcus's voice carried faintly through the wind. "It is done. Dylan failed, but the next one will not." That was all they needed. Suddenly, headlights flared from behind them. Another vehicle screeched to a stop, tires sliding on wet asphalt. Two of Marcus's guards stepped out, weapons drawn. "Get down," Quentin shouted, pulling Florencia behind the car. Atlas barked fiercely, the sound echoing across the runway. Sirens blared in the distance. The guards hesitated long enough for Quentin's security team to arrive, flooding the tarmac with red and blue lights. Within minutes, Marcus was dragged from his car, shouting as officers restrained him. Florencia stood beside Quentin, soaked to the skin, heart pounding. Atlas pressed against her leg, panting hard. Quentin looked at her, rain streaking down his face. "You did it," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, we did." And he looked down at Atlas, never doubted for a second. "Kunzing?" The storm began to ease. For the first time in weeks, the night sky above Ashcroft's empire felt clean again. But even as Marcus was taken away, Florencia knew this was not the end. Because loyalty, once proven, never truly rests, and trust, once earned, changes everything. Dawn broke over the Seattle skyline, painting the wet streets in streaks of silver and gold. After the chaos at the airfield, Ashcroft Hall finally stood quiet again. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained in every heart that had endured it. Florencia Paredes sat in the conservatory, her clothes still damp, a mug of untouched tea beside her. Atlas slept nearby, his head resting on his paws, finally at peace. Through the glass walls, she could see the lake, smooth and reflective under the first light of morning. She heard footsteps behind her. Quentin Ashcroft entered, wearing a fresh shirt and a bandage still wrapped around his shoulder. He looked exhausted, yet his posture was unshakably composed. In his hand was a folder filled with legal papers. "It is over," he said quietly. Marcus confessed. He had planned everything: Dylan's position, the bribe to the estate manager, even the malfunction in my car last year. He wanted control of the company and the inheritance that came with it. Florencia exhaled slowly. "So the person closest to you was the one trying to destroy you?" Quentin nodded. "That is the part I cannot seem to understand. He already had everything he needed. Why try to take what was not his?" Florencia looked down at Atlas, who stirred slightly at the sound of their voices. "Because some people mistake control for love. They think power will protect them from being forgotten." He studied her for a long moment. "And what about you, Florencia? What protects you?" She smiled faintly. "I have never had much to lose, so I learned to protect others instead." "Kai." He took a slow breath, his eyes softening. "I owe you more than I can repay." "You owe Atlas a lifetime of steak dinners," she said gently. "I just followed his lead." He laughed, the sound low and genuine, and for the first time the weight in the room seemed to lift. Later that afternoon, the mansion began to breathe again. The staff returned to normal duties, though their steps were quieter, more respectful. The tabloids outside the gates buzzed with headlines about the attempted takeover of Ashcroft Industries. But inside, peace felt almost possible. Florencia walked through the garden, touching the leaves still wet with rain. Quentin joined her, a rare sight without his phone or security team. "I had my lawyers draft something for you," he said. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of employment, not temporary this time, but permanent, offering her the position of head of behavioral training for the new Ashcroft Rescue Program, a foundation aimed at pairing abandoned dogs with veterans and trauma survivors. Her throat tightened as she read it. "You are serious?" "I do not make empty promises," he said. "You saw what loyalty can do. I want the world to see it too." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, smiling. "Then I accept." Atlas barked softly, as if giving his approval. They continued walking along the path until they reached the edge of the property where the forest met the lake. The air was cool and still. Quentin stopped, glancing at her. "You know," he said, "I spent years believing that strength meant isolation. But you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You made me realize that sometimes strength means letting someone else see you vulnerable." Florencia's voice was soft. "And sometimes love means trusting someone who does not belong to your world." For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the water brushing against the shore and the faint rustle of leaves. Then Quentin reached out and rested his hand on hers. It was not a grand gesture, just quiet truth. "I think Atlas already decided this long before we did," he said with a small smile. She laughed gently. "Dogs never lie." "No," he agreed, his tone warm, almost reverent. "They just lead us to what we were too blind to see." As they stood together under the morning light, the mansion behind them and the future unfolding before them, the chaos of the past week finally began to fade. Florencia looked toward the horizon and whispered, "Maybe this is what healing looks like, not the absence of fear, but the courage to stay." And beside her, Quentin nodded, his voice steady and sure. "Then let us stay. Call ye." Atlas lifted his head, tail swaying lightly in the breeze, a living symbol of loyalty, the bridge that had turned survival into trust, and trust into something deeper than either of them had expected. The following week, Ashcroft Hall appeared serene again, but beneath its polished calm lay unspoken tension. The news of Marcus Ashcroft's arrest had spread across every financial network in the country. Shareholders demanded statements, reporters camped outside the gates, and rumors filled every corner of the internet. Inside the mansion, Quentin Ashcroft sat at the grand dining table, his laptop open, phone buzzing nonstop. He had regained control of his company, but not his peace. The more he spoke to lawyers and board members, the clearer it became trust would take years to rebuild. Florencia Paredes stood by the window, watching the garden where Atlas played among the roses. She could see how the stress weighed on Quentin even when he tried to hide it. His voice was calm, but his shoulders were tense, his fingers tapping restlessly against the table. When he finally ended the call, he leaned back and sighed. "They want me to attend the annual board gala next week. Public appearance, they say. To prove that everything is stable." Florencia crossed her arms. "And is it?" He looked up, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. "Stable enough to fool them, maybe." "Cabal." She stepped closer, her tone firm but gentle. "Then go and show them what real leadership looks like. Not the kind that hides behind money or power, but the kind that owns up to pain and still stands tall." He studied her for a long moment, the corners of his mouth softening. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple," she said, "but it is honest." Atlas trotted into the room then, carrying a rolled-up document in his mouth. He dropped it at Quentin's feet, tail wagging proudly. The billionaire laughed for the first time in days. "He has better timing than my publicist." Florencia smiled. "He just hates seeing you frown." The light moment eased the air between them, but as Quentin bent to pet the dog, he winced slightly, the healing wound on his shoulder reminding them both how close things had come. Florencia's expression softened. "You do not have to face that crowd alone," she said quietly. "Atlas and I will be there." "Oh." He looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You would really do that?" "I have already seen you at your worst," she said, half smiling. "Facing a ballroom full of investors cannot be harder than facing a man with a gun." He laughed again, genuine this time, and something inside him shifted, something lighter, freer. "Then it is settled," he said. "The three of us will go." That evening, as twilight folded over the estate, Quentin stood on the terrace watching the sun sink behind the water. Florencia joined him, a blanket draped around her shoulders. "They will see a man who survived," she said softly, "but I will see someone who finally learned to trust." Quentin turned to her, his eyes steady. "And I will see the person who reminded me what that word means." Atlas lay between them, head resting on his paws, the last glow of daylight catching in his eyes. For the first time, Ashcroft Hall did not feel like a fortress. It felt like home. The night of the gala arrived, a night meant to mark a new beginning for Ashcroft Industries and for Quentin Ashcroft himself. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, their golden light spilling over crystal glasses and polished marble. Dozens of investors, politicians, and journalists filled the room, waiting to see if the once reclusive billionaire would finally face the world again. At the center of it all, Quentin stood tall in a black suit, his composure calm but his pulse steady beneath the fabric. Florencia Paredes walked beside him, wearing a simple navy dress that moved like shadow under the light. And at their heels padded Atlas, wearing a discreet service harness that drew more admiration than surprise. As the cameras flashed, Quentin leaned toward her and murmured, "I cannot believe I agreed to bring a dog to a shareholder gala." Florencia smiled. "You did not bring a dog. You brought the hero who saved your life. Let them see loyalty for what it truly is." The event began with speeches and applause, each voice trying to claim part of the victory. But Quentin's moment came when the host called his name. The crowd turned silent as he stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, the lights bright on his face. He began slowly, his tone even. "A few weeks ago I learned that wealth does not protect you from betrayal. Power cannot shield you from fear. And isolation is not strength. It is weakness disguised as safety." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He paused, his gaze finding Florencia in the front row. "But I also learned something else," he continued. "That trust, once given freely, can rebuild what fear destroys. And sometimes, the bravest acts come from those who have no reason to protect you except compassion." He gestured toward her and Atlas. "This woman and this dog saved my life not for reward, not for status, but because they believed in something simple. That loyalty still matters." Applause thundered across the room. Cameras flashed. Florencia felt her eyes sting, but she stood proud, one hand resting lightly on Atlas's back. Then, just as Quentin was about to step away from the microphone, a voice shouted from the back of the hall, "You do not deserve that company." The crowd gasped. 2 security guards rushed forward, restraining a man in a disheveled suit, Marcus Ashcroft, who had been released on bail pending trial. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "You think you are a hero? You are nothing without me." For a moment, the tension was suffocating. Quentin's expression hardened, but he did not step back. He faced his brother directly. "You are wrong, Marcus. I am nothing without them." He nodded toward Florencia and Atlas, "And that is the difference between us." Security escorted Marcus out as murmurs spread through the crowd. Quentin turned back to the audience, steady and composed. "Justice will take care of the rest," he said simply. "Tonight is not about vengeance. It is about truth." The applause returned, louder than before this time, not out of politeness, but out of respect. When the event ended, Quentin descended the stage. Florencia met him halfway, eyes shining. "You did not need to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied, "because every truth deserves to be spoken out loud." Atlas nudged Quentin's leg, tail wagging, and for the first time in years, Quentin smiled a smile that reached his eyes. That night, as they stepped out into the cool air, leaving the noise of the city behind, Florencia looked at him and whispered, "Dogs never lie." Quentin nodded. "No," he said quietly, "and neither should we." The next spring brought new life to Ashcroft Hall. The gardens bloomed again, filled with tulips and soft morning light. The lake reflected the bright sky, calm and endless. The chaos of the past months had faded into memory, leaving behind something stronger: peace, built on truth. Florencia Paredes walked through the field with Atlas running ahead of her, chasing the wind. His fur glistened under the sun, healthy and free. From the nearby hill, the sign of the new Ashcroft Rescue Center stood tall, the letters carved in silver, in memory of loyalty. The center had opened that morning. Reporters came to cover it, but the moment did not feel like publicity. It felt personal. Dozens of veterans, volunteers, and rescued dogs filled the courtyard. Laughter and soft barking carried through the air. Florencia turned as Quentin Ashcroft approached, wearing a white shirt and no tie for once. The seriousness that had once defined him was gone, replaced by quiet confidence. He stopped beside her, watching the volunteers walk Atlas toward a group of children for a demonstration. "He loves the attention," Quentin said, smiling. "He earned it," she replied. "He reminds everyone that loyalty is not a trick, it is a choice." They stood together for a while, listening to the hum of voices, the wind, and the rhythmic beat of Atlas's paws against the grass. "You know," Quentin said softly, "when I first met you, I thought you were just another employee, someone who would come and go. But you walked into my house and tore down every wall I built." Florencia looked at him, eyes warm but teasing. "You make it sound like I broke into a fortress." "You did," he said, his smile deepening. "And you made it a home." She glanced at the silver plaque on the building again. "Home is not the walls. It is the people who refuse to leave, even when it is hard." Quentin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a dog's paw print, engraved with 4 simple words, "Dogs never lie." Her breath caught. "Quentin," He took her hand gently. This is not about the past. It is about every day after. I cannot promise a perfect life, but I can promise honesty. The same kind of truth Atlas showed me. Ah. She looked at the pendant, then at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I will hold you to that. Atlas bounded back to them just then, tail wagging wildly. Quentin knelt, scratching behind his ears. You brought her to me, did you not? He murmured. The dog barked once, sharp and clear, as if answering yes. Florencia laughed through the tears that shimmered in her eyes. He never lies. Quentin rose, taking her hand. Neither will I. Goza. Together, they watched Atlas run into the sunlight, the wind rippling across the grass. The camera of the world might see a billionaire and a dog trainer, but what truly stood before them was something simpler, two souls bound by trust, and a dog whose faith had changed both their lives. Because in the end, money fades, power shifts, but loyalty, true loyalty, remains.